Jocelyn was only 6 years old when the man in orange tried to break through her window. Had it not been for her older brother Julian, I may be telling you a much different story. It occurred on the night of August 13th, a humid summer night filled with the sounds of crickets and tree frogs. The window AC unit hummed away in the living room. Unfortunately, the cold air did not make its way to the opposite side of the one-story Florida home. Jocelyn and Julian would sleep with box fans blowing wildly those nights, but they barely kept the sweat from rising on their skin as the humid nights of summer continued with no reprieve. Behind their expansive backyard, the coarse St. Augustine grass led its way to an easement separating an orange grove and the community they lived in. Beyond this was something different. Something everyone in the suburban community was aware of, but didn't mention. It wasn't a haunted house or some location where someone was murdered. It was a prison. The prison housed several hundred inmates at a time. Many were held there in between sentencing and future court dates. The locals, for many years, believed it better to not talk about the prison. Edna Shields, a neighbor, was quoted when asked about the prison. "We all believed it was better to not discuss it. Better to be locked up in the county broom closet than make a fuss over. Even small prisons have a way of preventing people from coming through, even if it's just for visiting friends or family." Edna did have a solid argument. Local prisons carry a stigma for the areas that surround them. Some people are terrified of even being close to a prison, while others say it's the safest place to be. It was the late comedian George Carlin who more or less said, well, if someone was to escape from prison, the last place they'd hang around was anywhere near it. Jocelyn at the time was only 6. She was unaware of the prison. After all, what would be the purpose of getting a little girl upset about something that would never happen? Famous last words. Several months prior, Joseph Gilmanson was arrested for the murder of his wife and 3 children. The Gilmanson children were only 14, 9, and 2 at the time. The 2 oldest, Erica, 14, and Joseph Jr., 9, were suffocated with a pillow. Afterwards, they were each shot in the head, while the pillow was still placed on their faces. Detectives on the scene declared it is not uncommon for a murderer to perform this kind of act. In a crime of passion, or as in this case, the murder of your own family, this final move eliminates any possibility of the person suddenly waking if the victim was not yet deceased. The youngest, Bethany, was the first of the family to go. Sadly, she was found in her crib with her tiny throat slit open. Slight bruises found on her cheeks. The bruising was thought to be from Joseph's hands in an attempt to cover her cries from being overheard by the other family members. Alice, or Allie Gilmanson, was located in the family's basement, hung by a rope attached to the joists in the ceiling. Her left and right ankle were both broken. The left was broken several hours later, according to the coroner. Apparently, Gilmanson let his wife hang there in agony, attempting to hold herself up with her broken ankles, ultimately succumbing to the rope that suffocated her once she could no longer hold her own body's weight on her busted legs. Joseph Gilmanson was found in the town of Millville, approximately 25 miles away from the family home. A patron of DeMott's Pub found Gilmanson laying naked in one of the bathroom stalls. Percy Chismar, the man who found him, was quoted in a follow-up interview about finding Gilmanson.
"He was covered in blood. His hands were clenched in fists so tight they looked like the bone was trying to break through at the knuckles. I'll never forget the face that turned and saw me. No, sir, not for as long as I live. The man's face was gray, like all the blood and color was sucked away. His hair was also full of something wet and sticky, blood as well, I suppose. His eyes, though, they would stand out the most. They looked at me, pupils so wide they almost looked black, like a demon's. They were sunk deep into his cheeks. Dark circles below made it look like that mascara stuff women use to pretty themselves up. It was all smeared all over. But no, it was his eyes. It was his skin. And he said only 2 words: killed and family. Now, I had not an idea what that meant, but it didn't sound good. So I ran out the bathroom as quick as I could, slammed a bar stool up against the knob, so he couldn't get out. Then I yelled over to Gus and Roger to help hold the door shut and call Sheriff Womack.
Since then, Joseph Gilmanson has been through several prison cells. Numerous attempts on his life inside caused more and more delays. The entire time he claimed it was not him. Although he was found with his entire family's DNA stuck to his body after further lab results. The evidence was there, and it had been there the entire time, but Gilmanson swore he could never kill his family. He claimed there was something else, something evil and malevolent, that has followed him in the shadows his entire life. Of course, there wasn't a single person, including the jury or the judge, that believed a word of it. Nobody in their right mind, no matter how biased, was willing to believe a man who brutally murdered his family was followed by a curse or some kind of monster that killed a man's family. Several years after the incident, a jury member who requested to remain anonymous said, "The only monster in that courtroom was Joseph Gilmanson. He was evil, a liar, and a murderer. He was not the loving family man his attorney tried to make him appear." Problems began, however, when many began to worry that Gilmanson's defense would possibly make a strong case for insanity so that he could prevent the death penalty. In an attempt to prevent this from happening, further court dates were pushed back for several months during an ongoing and elaborate mental evaluation. And it was during that time attempts were made on Gilmanson's life, only prolonging his sentencing and trial further and further away. Gilmanson, who was now awaiting sentencing the following week, escaped on August 13th, 1985. Earlier that afternoon, Jocelyn and Julian found a wounded lizard in their backyard. It's well known that small lizards in Florida will not only lose their tails to get away from a predator, but also will grow back a new one as time goes on. And Julian had seen his share of lizards with their missing appendage. However, this one had been trying to hobble away off the patio, but its wounded hind legs prevented it from running off to safety. The brother and sister scooped it up and kept it in a tiny glass aquarium that had been home to Jocelyn's goldfish. Goldie lasted only about 2 weeks before receiving the royal flush down the toilet. The aquarium had sat lonely in the corner of the garage, collecting dust by the rear window since then. "I hate to say it, guys, but he may be better outside with his friends than inside with us," Suzanne Coughlin said to her 2 small children. But we can try to help him. His leg is broken, I think. He'll die out there if we don't help him." It only took a few sweet tears of her 6-year-old to change her mind and allow the children to nurse the small lizard back to health. "Okay, you can try to help them, but do not take him out. He stays in there at all times. Is that clear?" "Clear, Mom. Thanks. Come on, Joss. Let's see if we can find some crickets for him to eat." The kids ran back outside, finding sticks and debris to make a small home for him inside the aquarium. Suzanne observed her children from the kitchen window in delight, everyone unaware that just a few miles away, Joseph Gilmanson was squeezing and contorting his way to his eventual escape. That night, Jocelyn and Julian Coughlin, who previously, and with much satisfaction to Suzanne, had been so happy and friendly, but that began to waver. "But I found him, Joss. It's my responsibility. No, it's my tank. He's going to sleep in my room." After several minutes of the two children arguing, Suzanne cut in. It was ultimately decided that Jocelyn would sleep with the lizard in her room that night, covered and sealed, I should add. Julian would have been able to keep it in his room the following night. This ultimately was the decision that changed the course of their lives that night. Under the moon and stars, Joseph Gilmanson wandered aimlessly. Only the faint lights in the distance guided him through the acres of orange trees. Only two thoughts continued to swell in the mind of Gilmanson. Where do I go, and where can I hide? He trudged through the fields of trees, ducking every once in a while, thinking he saw movements or detected dogs barking. He assumed it was his own paranoia after several times dodging behind a tree, holding his breath to listen. Each time the only sounds were the same crickets and tree frogs sounding their nightly chorus. He cursed and continued his silent march to the lights glowing several hundred yards from where he stood. As Gilmanson approached the dirt path that was used to travel to and from the orange grove, he hesitated. He was sure that as soon as he stood to jog across the path, dozens of spotlights and guards would be waiting to seize him, bringing him back to the prison. Laying prone in the weeds at the edge of the grove, he stayed, the damn crickets like nails on a chalkboard in his ears. Finally, he pushed himself on one knee. His weight made it settle into the damp grass below him, and he sensed the coolness on his knee through the thin orange jumpsuit. No lights, no dogs barking, and he soon began to believe he had been successful in his escape. He rose to his feet and began to jog across the path. He had spotted a large bunch of scrubby shrubs on the opposite side. That was where he would run and dip behind before his next move. A moment later, he was hidden. Shadows of the trees above him, shielded by the shrubs, he laid there still and silent. A moment later, as he laid on his back, he glanced over to his right, surveying the several houses from the edges of their backyards. Most had lights on still. Some had the faint silver-blue glow of a TV through thin curtains. The house furthest down, the one with the swing set, had the least amount of lights. This would be the house he would use to hide. He'd steal the car and do what he would need to do to get away, and he hoped it would be that easy, hoped he would experience little to no issues. All he acknowledged at this point was that he wasn't going back, no matter what the cost. Gilmanson approached the swing set. It was located in the far back corner. He stood 20 or so feet from it. He looked carefully at the house. He scanned each window until he spotted a single window that from his vantage point appeared to be open. Appearing in the window, a square box about the size of a toaster oven was perched in the left corner. Behind that, the room appeared dark. Inside the room, little Jocelyn Coughlin lay in her bed sleeping soundly. Spots, as she called her newly attained but injured pet, lay above her in the small aquarium. Julian had suggested she put the lizard on her windowsill so he could see the outside. Julian said it would probably make Spots feel more like he was safe at home. Jocelyn agreed, and the two of them spent a good half hour getting the aquarium set up just right on the sill. The aquarium had a base that was several inches wider than her windowsill. This concerned Julian. All he could imagine in his young mind was the teetering aquarium tipping over and crashing down on his sister's bed. Of course, Spots would either be hurt more or will have run away and they would never see him again. His other concern was for the tank to land on his sister and hurt her. But he was more concerned about the already wounded lizard. The only way for them to prop the aquarium on the sill correctly was to open Jocelyn's window and screen. This is what would allow them to slide the thin board they found in the garage on the sill. This would be broad enough now to fit the base of the aquarium securely. On most nights, the window was closed, and although the AC unit in the living room didn't supply enough cold air to the bedrooms situated in the rear of the house, if the children slept with a fan and their bedroom door open, enough cool air would wind its way to their side of the house. This is what kept them comfortable enough during the sweltering Florida summer nights. But tonight, little Jocelyn lay in her bed with her window slightly cracked open and her bedroom door shut. As Gilmanson approached the window quietly from the backyard of the Coughlin home, Julian stirred again in his bedroom across the hall. Every time Julian would begin to welcome the warm, familiar hands of sleep, his mind would suddenly switch to the lizard in his sister's bedroom. Eventually, he had had enough with all of the worrying. He grabbed the pillow from his bed and his sleeping bag from the closet. He decided he would be able to sleep if he camped out on the floor of Jocelyn's bedroom. This would also allow him to monitor how Spots was doing. As soon as he entered her bedroom door, he knew something was wrong. Jocelyn was sound asleep, laying on her side. The moonlight shined brightly through her window. The aquarium was no longer there. Instead, there was the silhouette of a man climbing through, reaching his hands towards the sleeping girl.
"Mommy, help!"
he screamed, while at the same time grabbing his sister's arm, pulling her off the bed before the man's hands could grab her. He was successful. Jocelyn fell to the ground with a loud thud. Julian then pulled her through the doorway, slamming it behind him. Suzanne came running down the hall, frantic and still foggy from sleep. What's wrong, Jules? What's wrong? There's... He couldn't get the words out. Suzanne prodded. There's what? Calm down. What's there? A man coming in her window. Suzanne's tension released, believing it was only a nightmare. And just as soon as she was about to say something, she heard a loud noise from behind Jocelyn's door. She took Julian by the shoulder, placing him behind her, as she apprehensively opened the door. Crouched on Jocelyn's bed, across the room, was Joseph Gilmanson. He had now made it through the window, but was struggling to gain his balance on the springy mattress and stuffed animals strewn on the bed. Suzanne slammed the door shut with a loud scream. Frantically, she ran thousands of ideas in her mind, some of how she would be able to escape the situation, but most were of being kidnapped or even worse, murdered by the mysterious and uninvited guest that had just broken in through her daughter's window. Luck had surely been on their side that night, as only a few days before Suzanne had decided to repaint her bedroom. Located outside her bedroom were several gallon containers of paint, which was the only weapon she could think in her haste to use. But more importantly, her bedroom phone was laying on the floor in the hallway they stood in. Suzanne quickly realized she couldn't let go of the door handle. Although she was sure the maniac on the other side would easily be able to open the door with a few quick twists of the handle, she would not let go. "Don't you come through this door," she shouted. "I have a gun and I will blow a hole through you as big as that window you climbed in, you sick son of a bitch." Julian stared at his mother, partly in shock, mostly confused, because all she had were the two hands fiercely tightened around the doorknob. "Julian," she muttered, nodding to the phone. "Call the police. Call them now. Tell them we have someone breaking into our house. Give them the address. Hurry. Go now." Julian scrambled to the phone. The phone number for the local police station was written down on the phone's keypad. Several numbers were there, but the number for the police was the boldest, as Suzanne used a marker for that number. In the case of, but never wished upon, emergencies. "You don't have to do that, ma'am," a voice yelled from the other side of the door. Gilmanson's voice. "Just give me your car and I'll leave. Simple as that. You hear me?" "Don't you take another step towards this door. I swear to God I will shoot you dead. Why do you want my car?" Suzanne didn't care less what his answer was, just as long as she could hear his voice. This would allow her to know he was still in the room and not trying to escape out the window. She waited until he responded. Julian was still on the phone with dispatch, but she couldn't have them wait any longer. She whispered again, "Julian, take Joss and run across to Miss Hatfield's house. Hurry. Tell her what's happening. Go now." Jocelyn began to cry, not fully understanding if this was real life or a bad dream. She felt her brother's hand grab hers as her feet began to run below her. To young Jocelyn, it seemed like she was a different person. One following her brother to the front door, the other part of her still stuck in the moment, watching it all unfold before her. Gilmanson stood in the room, contemplating his next move. Should he just scramble out the window and take cover, or should he muscle his way through the young mother and her kids? He supposed she didn't have a husband or boyfriend in the house, or he would have heard a man's voice. He decided to take his chances with the young mother. He stood in the middle of the room. He didn't take any steps. He waited to see what he could hear through the door. All he caught were some inaudible whispers. "I don't want to hurt no one. I just want your car. That's all." The children rushed to the door, opened it, and began running through the front yard. She prayed they would get there unharmed. Of course it was a risk, but either way, she played the scenario through her mind. She knew they had a better chance by leaving the house instead of being inside it. "If I give you my car, how do I know you're going to leave us alone?" Again, she didn't care about his response. She simply wanted to know if he was still in the bedroom. "I'll give you my word." "I don't believe you." Furious now, Joseph approached the door, slamming his palms on it. "Give me your fucking car, lady. You have to the count of 10 to let me have it. 10! Gilmanson began to count down. Raging tears began filling her eyes. All she wanted was to make sure the kids were okay, that they were safe. "I need to keep him talking," she thought. Gilmanson continued counting. She knew any moment he'd begin pulling on that knob, and she wouldn't be able to hold it all night. The knob already slippery in her sweaty hands. She understood she had only one move. If he did get the door open, she hoped that move would be enough. 1. I'm coming through now. He grabbed the knob, and with a few hard jerks, it turned all the way. He gradually began to open the door. He was still unsure, but confident enough that the woman on the other side did not, in fact, have a gun. Suzanne had let go of the doorknob. She backed up to the wall, hitting the light switch, shutting them all off in the hallway. The knob began turning more and more as her adrenaline began coursing through her veins. She recognized the familiar creak of the door begin to peel itself from the paint that would stick in the warm Florida humidity. That was the sound she waited for. Without missing a beat, she ran at the door with all of her might. She hoped it would allow her enough force to stun him. As Gilmanson continued to open the door, he began to cock his head to take a glance into the hallway. Just as he was about to get a look, the door blasted him in the bridge of the nose. Everything went white for a split second. The pain was instant. The taste of blood was just as fast. He stumbled backwards as the force of the door brought him down on his ass. His head hit the bookcase behind him. He shook the pain from his throbbing face, only to be clobbered on the top of his skull by a silver paint can. The warm sensation of blood from his split skull began to pour down his forehead, his eyebrows trickling into his eyes. The doorway ahead of him was blurry and spinning. The woman screamed, and he heard her footsteps hastily running down the hallway. Gilmanson lay there, dazed. The faint sound of sirens could be detected in the distance. He couldn't tell if he was imagining the sirens or if they were real. He also was just beginning to grasp he got his ass kicked by a young mother protecting her children. The sirens began to increase in volume. This caused him to become more aware. He had to get out. Flee for the second time that day. Not only had the dumb bitch called the police, but he was sure that by now the prison was already aware of his escape and everyone was out looking for him. He approached the window, this time to escape out of it. He was angry with himself. He was so close to freedom he could almost taste it, but now the weight of getting caught again was explicit. He began climbing through the window. The sirens were very close now, within 100 yards or so. As his feet landed on the ground below, he heard the shrieks of several car tires screech in the front of the house. Through the backyard, he could see more flashing blue and red lights approaching the path he ran across only a short time ago. His only chance was to run to the side of the house and duck into the next-door neighbor's yard. It was a dangerous move, but one that must be taken. As he crept his way over to the side of the house, he peered his head around the corner. It was clear. It's now or never, he thought. He counted to 3 and began sprinting across the yard. In the dark, he did not make out the chicken wire fence that surrounded the neighbor's vegetable garden. Gilmanson tripped, falling hard. He tried to stand, but his feet and ankles were caught in the fence. "Put your hands on your head and don't make a move. You're surrounded." "He's over here! He's over here!" the officer yelled. Gilmanson knew he was fucked. He began thrashing his legs, attempting to get loose of the chicken wire. "Stay still and stay down," the voice yelled. He looked at the officer, his gun trained on Gilmanson's chest. "I ain't going back. You can kill me, but I ain't going back." Gilmanson began to stand. The officer began shouting, then another. Several officers surrounded him. Their flashlights began blinding him. Gilmanson raised his hands to block the light. An officer on the scene, who had only been on the force for 2 months, began to fire his weapon. On that officer's official paperwork, he noted that he thought the perpetrator had raised a weapon. That's why he fired. Gilmanson felt the first bullet buzz past his right ear, a second by his left. The third hit him in the shoulder. Several other rounds sounded in multiple directions. Shots rained down on him. Sharp, pounding sensations began hitting his body. The noise of bullets missing their mark, hitting the dirt with a dull thud, eerily sounded the same to Joseph as the bullets entering his flesh. As Gilmanson lay on the ground, everything moving in slow motion, he saw the silhouettes of a family watching it all from across the street. A shadow of a teenage girl and her younger brother. A thin woman in a nightgown held a small child in her arms, their heads all tilted to the side, watching him as the bullets continued to riddle his body. Each bullet that entered him pulled the vision of the silhouettes closer to him, until they were only a few feet in front of him. It was them. It was his family. They were all there, watching this happen to him. Their faces were dark, shadowed, but he identified it was them. And suddenly, as the shooting ceased, Gilmanson gazed up at his wife one final time. He saw the glowing edge of a rope noose still around her neck. Tears filled his eyes on his final few breaths. As his face sunk into the earth below him, he examined her ankles. They were twisted and cracked, not touching the ground. In fact, all of them hovered only inches off of it. As his life began to drain away, he saw the spirits of his family drift away like smoke in a starless sky. Behind them, only now visible to him, the dark entity that had followed him his entire life stood watching. Through the darkness, the malevolent being observed through its lifeless eyes of black. It waved to the dying man as it stepped back, disappearing into the darkness forever. Gilmanson let out one last dying breath. "I told you, it wasn't me." It was a Saturday evening. The roads were full of busy people. Vendors crowded the streets, trying to sell and buy merchandise. There were places to be and things to do. It took a while for people to notice the change. Clocks everywhere began acting up. Anything displaying time had suddenly changed. Whether it be a watch or a smartphone, the numbers inexplicably warped themselves without human intervention. Even technology that had been previously shut down or disconnected turned itself on and followed the new trend. They all turned to the number 12, and then 11 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. The time remaining ticked down, second by second. Some sort of countdown had started. It didn't take long for people to realize that what was happening wasn't a simple problem with their own watches or phones. Other people had it. People started to take notice and awaited an answer. It was soon realized by everybody that the televisions and radios were affected as well. The screens also displayed the time, and the radios blared static. In a world that ran on technology, these events unnerved many people, even if what was happening didn't appear to be harmful. While many were disturbed by the display in front of them, they put it off as a minor inconvenience. After all, the problem probably wouldn't last long and wouldn't hurt them too badly. It was just a strange occurrence that would soon be addressed. As people tried to carry on with their day, things began to get worse. Electricity and machinery began shutting down. Cars and motorcycles stopped working without cause. There was a cutoff of communication. The news ceased to exist. Newspapers could no longer be delivered. Questions quickly arose as to what was happening. Theories spread like wildfire, suggesting many things. Some were concerned a massive hack was responsible. Others had assumed this was a prank or some sort of publicity stunt. There was even word of aliens tampering with Earth. Nobody knew what to believe. Just a day in, and people began panicking. The night was plunged into total darkness. Not a single light lit any neighborhood street or home. And come early morning, the timer still counted down. Nothing had changed from the previous day. The sense of fear and isolation had grown substantially. Could this be something more? Those who wanted answers marched the streets. Some piled into churches, searching for a more religious reason. With the breakdown of machinery came obvious problems. The refrigerators and freezers had stopped working. Water systems failed, and ovens and microwaves could no longer be used. And although everyone was concerned, people began to turn against one another. Tension rose as more and more people became frightened. Nobody knew what the countdown was for and what would happen if it hit 0. Crime rose everywhere, and the police could do little to stop it. Without cars or communication, the cops were limited in resources, and they cared more about their family than upholding the law. They were all concerned with the timer. What consequences would there be when it ran out of time? It was when they realized nobody was coming to save them that all hell broke loose. Shops were torn apart and looted. Those deprived of their needs the most assaulted others and stole whatever they could. In the short span of 2 days, people had already begun to act like animals. The streets were no longer safe. It was no longer safe to travel anymore. The nights became even worse than before. Screams echoed through neighborhoods. Homes were broken into and cars were busted open. What was happening was inhuman. Places that had been safe were now home to acts of violence and crime. Those who were once good men and women of society had become so focused on survival that in a few days of deprivation, they had changed completely. The clock continued its steady pace toward 0. The time remaining dwindled closer and closer towards an unknown fate. Every second that passed was a second closer to something, but that was all anybody knew. Stores and churches previously full of hopeful people were vandalized and empty. Those lucky enough to live close to their loved ones stayed with them. As time progressed, gangs ran the streets. Men brutally murdered each other. They thought the world was ending. It seemed almost everybody believed this to be true. Self-proclaimed messiahs preached the end of days. Some wanted to be saved by the grace of God. The world at this point had become post-apocalyptic. There was no maintenance at all. Bodies lay covering sidewalks. Some starved to death or died of dehydration. The odor that came with it was unbearable. Many took their own lives to escape what might happen soon. Law enforcement was now gone. Nobody cared to be sneaky about committing crimes. Cries for help became common. People were no longer people. Humans became ruthless animals concerned only with their own well-being. People shouted for help and mercy. Neighbors turned on each other when they could no longer support themselves with what they had. The screams begging for help became louder and louder. They were desperate shrieks of those clinging to what they had left. Their loved ones were malnourished. The common necessities of everyday life taken for granted became scarce. People were weak, dying. Their eyes and souls became weaker as hope escaped them. A hope that once sparked us with life and faith drained until none remained. Many people grew sick. Mothers screamed for their children. They screamed for someone to help their kids. No one came. No one saved them. Some people even abandoned those who they loved. The final day arrived. The silence was almost as terrible as the cries that used to frequently fill the air. The dead became the decayed. The clock counted down the hours. Those still alive prepared for the worst. No one dared to do anything at all but watch the clock. The streets were empty of any signs of life. The screams stopped. The earth was void of noise. No more groans of pain and suffering. The only remaining feeling was that of dread. A huge shadow of sadness loomed over the earth. with an unknown threat awaiting. All the time of waiting and fear would come to an end soon. The last hour had started. The countdown was nearly over. The world had lost its mind because of a timer. Everybody sat watching the clock. What would happen at the end? Would the damnation of the evil start? The hearts of those waiting sunk as the endless theories of terrible fates were all that they could think about. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Minutes that seemed to go by too quickly. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Those who were afraid of what lay ahead had destroyed themselves out of terror. Hope was lost. The world was hellish and animalistic, a shell of what was. There was nothing, and all for what? Why? Nobody knew why. Tick, tock, tick, tock. This story is loosely based on a real ghost story. I hope you enjoy. Before waking from his nightmare, Anthony Neibolt was being chased by something or someone. It was hard to make out, as many times dreams can be. A voice whispered incoherent but angry words slithered from its mouth. Was it a woman, a man, a child? Was it all three? He didn't know. All he sensed within the dream was ominous darkness chasing at his heels. The last words he caught before waking up were, "Where's Daddy?" Anthony sprang up, heart racing, sweat covered his face, neck, and back. He welcomed the hand of his wife, Corinne, tenderly touch his arm, consoling him. "Bad dream," he murmured. He lay back down, the damp cool of the bedsheet on his bare skin. Anthony had been sweating quite a bit before the dream stirred him out of his restless sleep. He glanced over at his wife, her hand still warm on his arm, her eyes closed. She had fallen back asleep. He blinked away, a few remnants and cobwebs still lingering from the dream. The unfamiliar bedroom of the new home greeted his confusion. It's been nearly 4 weeks since they moved into the new place, but he was still having a difficult time processing where he was. What happened again? The dream was becoming faint, hardly remembered. He sensed his pulse returning to normal. Anthony exhaled one last deep breath, relaxing his nerves. He glanced to his left, the moon shining through the bedroom window. A figure stood before it. A silhouette, the dark shape of a shadow faced him. Then, a tiny voice croaked, "Daddy, can you hear me?" "Brian?" he asked, startled for the second time. 2 times in as many minutes was enough to make him want to go walk to the kitchen and pour a scotch. Unfortunately, they were packed away in moving boxes, someplace in the garage. "Daddy, someone, a lady, is singing in Abby's room. I can't sleep." Singing? What the hell is he talking about? He thought. I don't think anybody's singing in there, buddy. Maybe you're just hearing something outside." Anthony understood they all had to grow used to the new home. He realized how strange this must all seem to Brian. Being only 5 and in a new home, a new town, a new state, Anthony was sure Brian was just groggy and confused. "Do you want to get a glass of water and I'll tuck you back into bed?" Brian sighed. "I told Mommy, too, about the lady. And she didn't believe me either." He wasn't surprised Corinne hadn't mentioned it. But it did beg the question of when the boy told his mother. "Hey, bud, it's not that Mommy and I don't believe you. It's just that, well, I locked the door last night. I even checked all the windows, and everything is locked up, ship-shape, so..." He paused, ruffling the boy's messy blonde hair. "There's no way that somebody could get inside, and definitely not a singing lady." In the dim glow of the moonlight, he could make out Brian starting to smile. Anthony gently sat up, grabbed his t-shirt from the chair he had tossed it on earlier when he went to bed. "Let's go to the kitchen, and we'll both have something to drink. How's that sound?" "Milk and Oreos?" Brian cried. Anthony smiled but winced at the same time, taking a quick look at Corinne, who fortunately was still sleeping. "Shh, bud. You're going to wake Mommy. Let's be quiet. We'll go to the kitchen. Watch out for Cooper." Cooper, their loyal golden retriever, was snoring peacefully, curled up in a donut position, on the floor at the foot of their bed. They scooted past the dog as silently as they could, tiptoeing to the kitchen. As they dipped their second Oreo into the glass of milk, Cooper walked in and plopped down on the floor in front of them. Apparently, they were not the only ones that wanted a late-night treat. After having their share of Oreos, Anthony placed the package back in the freezer, which is how they preferred to eat them. Brian took one last swig of his milk and commented, "Nothing better than a frozen Oreo in milk," licking his lips. Anthony smiled, nodding for his son to walk back to his room. He followed him inside, gave him a kiss on the forehead, and tucked him back in. As Anthony walked out of the bedroom, Brian stirred, sat up, resting on his elbows. "Daddy, if there is a lady singing to Abby at night, make sure you save her. I love Abby, and I don't want the lady to take her." "That's something you're never going to have to worry about. Mommy and Daddy will always be here to protect you both. Get some sleep, bud. It's really late." The boy laid back down, curling up on his side. "Okay, Daddy. Good night. I love you." "I love you too, bud. I'll see you in the morning." Anthony turned back to his bedroom. Corinne was still sleeping, and Cooper had retreated to his spot on the floor again, watching as Anthony snuck back in the room. As he laid back down, he thought he overheard the sound of whispers coming through the baby monitor. Thinking about what Brian just said, he felt his chest turn to ice. A sudden fear bolted through him in the dark of his bedroom. He hopped out of bed again. This time it was enough to stir Corinne awake. "Honey, what's wrong? Is it Abby?" she questioned. "Nothing, babe. Don't worry. I'm going to go check something real quick. Go back to bed. I'll be back in a few minutes." He swiftly walked over to the baby's room. Her door was pitched open only a few inches. Anthony put his ear to the door and listened before he entered. He didn't hear anything and decided to open the door. Abby was laying in her crib, sound asleep. He tiptoed to her crib, taking a closer look. Her pacifier was still in her mouth, and every few moments he would view it move as she sucked on it while sleeping soundly. For a brief moment, Anthony believed he smelled something odd in the room, something familiar but distant at the same time. It was most likely the baby's distinct laundry detergent, but at the same time, it reminded him of stale perfume. He bent over, putting his nose close to the sleeping girl. He inhaled and could make out the aroma of the special detergent Corinne used for Abby. He closed his eyes, inhaling, again noticing the unmistakable fragrance of something else, something woody, but sweet. He heard a creak somewhere in the house. It was not a floorboard, but the sound of metal, almost like a squeaky wheel. He hastily turned around, catching a glimpse of a shadow move on the hallway wall. He walked to the door, hoping that Brian or Cooper were not standing outside about to walk in and wake the baby. When he got to the door, there was nobody there. Anthony considered this for a moment, recalling if he did see something move, or if it was his imagination playing tricks at this late hour. After a moment, he blew it off, believing it may have been the reflection of headlights from outside. He went back to bed. He slept fine that night. That weekend, Brian and Anthony worked on tidying up the garage. Corinne had spent the rest of the week unpacking, and by the time the weekend came, almost every box was emptied. The floor of the garage was covered with dismantled pieces of cardboard and the hollow remains of empty boxes. As dinner time approached, Anthony swept up the final bit of dust and debris that was left. Brian held the dustpan as Anthony pushed it on. "Looks like we're done, Daddy," Brian said, dumping the pan into the garbage can. "Sure does." He stuck out his hand. "We got a lot of work done this weekend. Thanks for the help, buddy." Brian trotted over, shaking his father's hand. He smiled, proud of the work he had done with his dad. Anthony squatted, getting eye level with the boy. "You want to know the best part of being finished with a tough job like this?" Brian looked at him, his eyes wide. "What, Dad?" "Getting a cold drink and a nice big dinner for our bellies." He grabbed the boy, picking him up over his shoulders. He began tickling his ribs. Brian squirmed, thrashing in his arms, giggling and laughing as they walked inside to the kitchen. Corinne was sitting at the kitchen table. Abby was in her baby bouncer. The baby smiled as they entered. "Make sure you wash your hands, bud," Corinne motioned to the kitchen sink. "Dinner almost ready?" Anthony asked. "In about a half an hour or so. Why?" "Think I'm going to hop in the shower real quick. I think I have half the dust from the garage still stuck to me. I'll be down before it's ready and help you set the table." He leaned in to kiss her on the cheek. She pushed him away, telling him to clean up. "You stink," she laughed. "Do I stink, Mommy?" Brian asked. "I worked hard too today." "Never," she said, grabbing him and kissing the boy on his dirty cheeks. Anthony arrived back to the kitchen 20 minutes later, clean-shaven, wearing a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. "You want some help setting up the table?" he asked. Corinne looked up from her chair. She was playing with Abby and the bouncer. "Sure, grab the plates. I'll get the silverware." As they set the table, Corinne began to hum. Anthony listened as they set up. Interesting. What song is that?" he asked. Corinne stopped humming. "What was that, babe?" "I asked what that song was that you were humming to yourself." She walked to the stove, stirring the simmering sauce. "Oh," she giggled. "I don't really know. I was just humming. Maybe I heard it in the car or something." I never heard it before. But Brian was humming it all day today, too." Corinne shrugged her shoulders and went back to stirring the sauce. "Well then, it probably was something we listened to while driving." Brian then walked back into the kitchen. He gave them both a big smile. "I'm all cleaned up, just like the garage." "Yes, you are, big boy. Good job." Corinne patted his head as he walked by to the kitchen table. "Hey, bud. Thanks again for today. You were a big help." Brian smiled as he sat down. "We did good today, didn't we?" "We sure did." Anthony pondered for a moment. "Hey, bud. Remember that song you were humming today, the one in the garage?" Brian looked up, the smile gone from his face. "Yeah?" he questioned. "Where did you hear it?" Brian didn't reply. He only stared down at the kitchen table, fiddling with the utensils and napkin. "Buddy, where'd you hear it?" Anthony prodded. "Babe, I told you, we most likely heard it on the radio in the car," Corinne said, placing the bowl of spaghetti and meatballs on the table. I don't want to say, Dad," Brian eventually answered. "What do you mean, Brian? It's okay," Corinne asked, confused. She glanced at Anthony. I don't want to tell you where I heard it." "It's okay, bud. You don't have to tell us if you don't." Brian cut him off. "It's the song the lady sings when she watches Abby sleep at night." That night in their bedroom, Corinne sat upright in their bed, frantically biting her nails, a trait she performed only when under extreme duress. The last time Anthony recalled watching his wife experience this level of anxiety was when they waited for Corinne's mother's test results, believing she may have cancer. "Babe, are you okay?" he asked, sitting next to her on the bed. Corinne didn't look at him. She stared blankly at the wall in front of her, all the time gnawing on her fingernails. "Is it what Brian said before dinner?" This simple-minded question was ultimately what made her stop, look up, and answer him. "Of course it's what Brian said at dinner. What the hell else would it be, Aunt?" She rarely called him by his name. "I don't think it's anything to worry about, babe. Like you said, you probably heard the song on the radio." With that, Corinne shot up off the bed and began pleading with Anthony. "Are you for real right now? I mean, are you for fucking real? Our son, our 5-year-old son, told us he hears a woman singing in our daughter's bedroom, and somehow—" She scoffed, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes in an attempt to gain her composure. "And somehow, I know the song too. A song you've never heard. I mean, what the hell is going on here?" She began tearing up. Anthony didn't know if it were tears of fear, sadness, or anger. Perhaps they were a sprinkling shower of all three. "Listen, it's purely coincidental, nothing more, nothing less. Do you honestly think that there's some woman that comes in here at night and sings to Abby?" He was reminded of what he heard the other night through the baby monitor. "I don't know, Aunt. But one thing I do know." She hesitated again, putting her hand to her mouth, choking back more tears. "Brian mentioned the woman to me a couple of weeks ago, shortly after we moved in." Anthony pursed his lips. "He did?" "He came to me, so scared. Terrified is more like it. He said he thought someone was going to try to take Abby from us. Oh my God, Anthony, he was so scared." She burst into tears while looking him in the eyes. She noticed the small twitch anytime Anthony's nerve flicker and he begins clenching his teeth. He gulped, grabbing her hand in his. "He told me something the other night too." Corinne's eyes widened. Incredulous, she asked him why didn't he say anything to her, why he didn't mention it. "And you didn't think to tell me?" Surprised and a little angry with her reaction, Anthony stood up. "Well, you didn't tell me anything either, did you? You said Brian told you when we first moved in, right? Well, that was way before he said anything to me. You kept it a secret, blew it off, whatever, and you're going to jump down my throat about it?" Corinne sighed and sat back down on the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry," she said. I don't want to fight, babe. This is all just confusing. Brian's going through something. It's probably the move, but the writing's on the wall." She began biting her nails again. Anthony shrugged. "You're right." He also sat back down, putting his arm around her. "All of us have to get adjusted. It's a lot of changes happening very quickly, especially for him. I mean, 7 months ago it was only us. Then Abby was born, then the move, everything with your mom, and thank God that's okay. But yeah, we've been going through a lot. And for a 5-year-old, I can't even imagine." Corinne smiled. She appreciated that he understood. She leaned over, putting her head on his shoulder. "I think you're right." She hesitated, then looked up at him again. "But why would he say something so strange? It's not like Brian to say anything like that. I wish there was a way for him to forget it all and just not even think about it anymore." Anthony smirked, clapped his hands together, and said, "I think I got a solution for that." "What?" she asked. "I'm going to sleep in there. I'll sleep in Abby's room with him. Show him there's nobody in there but us. He'll see, and hopefully this will all be a silly memory we can put behind us. What do you think?" She considered this for a moment and agreed that this could be a simple way to jump this hurdle and begin moving forward, away from this whole thing. "Yeah, I like that idea, babe. I really, really do." "We'll do it tomorrow night. We actually found all the camping gear this afternoon cleaning those boxes. I'll grab the sleeping bags for us." He smiled. "Brian is going to love it." The following night, Anthony, Corinne, and Brian watched a movie together as Abby slept in her bouncer at the edge of the couch. By 9:30, Brian had begun nodding off, which was the plan. Most nights, Brian is tucked in and in bed by 8:15 at the latest. Anthony and Corinne thought it may be better to have him stay up later and get him tuckered out so he could get a good night's sleep while camped out on the floor of his sister's bedroom. It was now a little after 10 p.m. Brian was already sleeping while Anthony lay next to him reading a book on his tablet. Soon, Anthony too began to sense his eyes getting heavy. By 10:30, he had turned off the screen. He positioned himself in a more comfortable position and drifted off to sleep. At 1:33 a.m., Anthony was awoken by Corinne, tugging at the end of his sleeping bag.
Babe! Anthony!
Hey, yeah, what? Everything okay? He sat up looking at his watch.
It's 1:30 in the morning, what's wrong?
He noticed the confusion lining her face, even in the dimly lit room.
Who were you just talking to? I heard voices on the baby monitor.
Babe, what are you talking about? Next to him, Brian stirred and began moving around in his sleeping bag. He put his finger to his mouth instinctively, motioning to be quiet so the boy didn't wake up.
Aunt, I'm sure I heard voices. At least two. I half expected to walk in the room and see you and Brian whispering to each other.
Babe, I'm scared. Really scared. He observed her put her hand to her mouth again and begin gnawing at her fingernails.
Babe, you need to relax. It's nothing. Maybe I was talking in my sleep.
She cut him off before he could say anything more.
Babe, you were sound asleep, Aunt. I was tugging on you for almost a full minute before you woke up.
Okay, well, look. He gazed around the room for a moment.
You can see there's nobody in here.
It would be hard for two people to be inside this room, don't you think?
That's just it, Aunt. I don't believe it was a person, let alone multiple people. I think it's something else.
Anthony gasped, shaking his head.
Will you come to the kitchen with me, babe? I want to show you something.
Anthony entered the kitchen a few minutes after Corinne. She had put on the electric kettle and the water was already hot and ready.
I'm making myself some tea. Would you like any?
Anthony winced at the bright light in the kitchen. He pinched the bridge of his nose, wiping some of the sleep from his eyes. He yawned as he replied, Sure, but don't change the subject. I'm sorry, babe, but I'm beat tired. Brian's in there sleeping. I don't want him to wake up and not see me in there. Just let's go. She grabbed 2 mugs from the cabinet as well as 2 tea bags. As she poured the steaming water into the mug, she continued. I'm not changing the subject, Aunt, but I need to calm my nerves. She grabbed her mug, held it up to her nose, inhaling the lemon-scented tea. She took a deep breath. Babe, I haven't been 100% honest with you recently. There's something that happened to me in this house, but I didn't want to bother you with it. In fact, I'm not even sure why I'm telling you now. You'll probably just blow it off, but... He stopped her mid-sentence.
Why would you think that? Why wouldn't you tell me?
She smiled at him, gripping his large hand in hers.
Because it might make me look foolish, like a silly little girl. I don't want you to think I'm crazy here, okay?
Anthony looked at his wife, pursing his lips. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest. Okay, go on, I'm listening.
Aunt, what I'm about to tell you, I need you to promise to keep an open mind. Fair?
He nodded.
Remember the week we moved in, and you had to go back to Jersey for a few days to wrap some things up with the office?
Again, Anthony nodded. Yeah, I had to meet with Ray and go over the rest of the details about the relocation. Did something happen? Did somebody try to break in? His voice rose, anxious and angry.
No, nothing like that.
She noticed his shoulders relax.
I know you told me to stay out of it, but I went to the attic to see if I could make some room for some of those boxes so there wouldn't be so many in the garage. And do you remember that mirror we found up there when we first viewed the house?
Anthony remembered the mirror. It was large, well over 7 feet tall. It was a gigantic antique mirror that easily weighed over 200 pounds. He recalled making a comment about the sheer size of it and how or why anyone would have put it up in the attic. The previous homeowners had called before the closing and told him they had left the mirror and would credit Anthony and Corinne a few $100s for a company to remove it, but they declined and told him it wasn't necessary. Now the mirror sat there, dusty and covered in cobwebs. "Yeah, I remember the mirror. It's kind of hard to forget," he smirked. "Takes up half the attic." Corinne hesitated, and to give her a few more precious seconds, she took a sip of her tea. "Well, I tried to move it." "You did what? What the hell, Corinne? You could have—" She yelled at him, cutting him off. "Anthony, listen to me." He sat peacefully, but behind his silence, he could sense his blood pressure rising. "I wasn't able to move it at first. It's way too heavy." Anthony grit his teeth and was almost about to speak. "The thing is, when I put my hands behind it, I felt a draft. It was like a small, cold blast of air hit my fingers. Then I heard something behind me, and I turned around, but nothing was there. I grabbed the mirror again, and I was able to slide it a bit, and I put my hands further behind it. And not only did I feel more of the draft, but I felt an opening in the wall." "An opening?" he asked. "Yeah, and I guess my curiosity got the best of me or helped me, but I was able to move that mirror several feet from the wall. It moved easy, like it had wheels that suddenly unlocked and rolled on the floor. And sure enough, there was a large square hole in the wall that led to a room." "Corinne," Anthony snorted, "please tell me you didn't go inside, especially with the kids home. I hope you weren't that naive." She shrugged her shoulders. "What else was I going to do? I actually didn't go inside it right away. I did go back downstairs, check on the kids when I grabbed the flashlight. And it was a room. Nothing much to it, I thought at first. A few old books on the floor and dust, a lot of dust. But as I scanned the room with the flashlight, I saw something dark in the corner. Something reflected back, so I held the light on it. It was an old baby carriage. I mean, really old. It was all rusted up. The material was all stained, most likely from just years of being hidden up there. Is it still there?" "Well, that's just it. And this is the part I need you to listen to, Aunt, like you promised. Keep an open mind." She waited for him to agree again. "Okay, my mind's open. Is it still there?" She took another sip from her mug. By this time, the tea was only warm. "Once I realized the room was empty, except for the carriage and those books, I walked over to it. And that's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't a mildew odor, it was something worse, something rancid. But at the same time, I could smell something else, like a perfume." Anthony felt his heart pound in his chest. His mouth went dry immediately. "Did you say perfume?" "Well, that's what I think it was. Anyways, when I moved it, there was a bunch of fabric inside, or I thought it was fabric. I bent down to smell it and realized that stench was coming from it." She started to stumble on her words. Anthony saw her eyes were beginning to get red as tears began to form like water at the end of a melting icicle. "It's okay, babe, go on," Anthony said, gripping her hand tighter in his. "Oh, Aunt, oh, babe, I should have said something. I'm so stupid." She released her hand from his and got up and walked to the kitchen sink. "What is it, babe? Tell me." Behind choked tears, she continued. "I unwrapped the cloth. It was a bunch of old baby blankets, and the more I unwrapped them, the more I could detect the perfume, while at the same time smelling that other rancid scent. Then something fell and hit my foot. I grabbed the flashlight to see what it was, and the blankets fell from my hand and fell in the bassinet." "What was it?" Aunt asked. She turned back around to face him, only this time her face didn't show sadness. It showed pure terror. "It was the bones of a small arm. I screamed and noticed the blankets had opened up fully in the carriage. Inside were the remains of a baby, an infant, Aunt, maybe the same age as Abby." She ran across the kitchen to him as he embraced her in his arms. He was astounded, shocked to say the least. "Babe, we have to get that out of the house. I mean, I doubt if it has anything to do with what's going on, or
Maybe it does, but we have to remove it. We have to... She gripped him tighter and whispered, I already did. He gently grabbed her shoulders and pried her away from him. He inspected her eyes, still pink and filled with tears. You did? Yes, the night before you got home, I took everything outside when the kids were asleep, including the, what you found inside it. Everything, Aunt. Everything except for the mirror. Baby. Oh my God. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? You've been keeping this a secret this whole time? Aunt, that's the thing. The next day was when Brian told me he heard a woman singing in Abby's room. She sat back down, slumped over her now cold mug of tea. I think I might have disturbed something. I think I really fucked up. No, Anthony cried. Absolutely not. You did exactly what you should have done. I would have done the same thing. Listen, tomorrow, I'm going to the attic. I'm going to destroy that mirror and cover up that... Suddenly, from Abby's room, they heard Brian scream. They both bolted upstairs to find Brian laying on the floor of the hallway, sucking his thumb, eyes facing the wall. Brian hadn't sucked his thumb in several years. Anthony bent down, putting his hand on the boy's back, as Corinne walked into Abby's room. A moment later, Corinne screamed. Anthony jumped up, running in the bedroom. Before them was a dark figure in the window. A woman with a dark, gothic dress that resembled black soot. Her skin, hair, and arms were the same color. She floated only a few inches away from Abby's crib, her face twisted in a snarl at the two of them. Anthony approached the crib. The woman's eyes began turning red. Get away from my baby, Corinne shrieked at the woman. The woman stayed, hovering behind the crib, in the dark corner by the window, staring at Anthony ferociously, like a wounded animal ready to attack whatever approached it. She swayed in the dark like a piece of silk hung on a clothesline. Her black hair was gnarled and curled like a mangy dog. In the silence, Anthony and Corinne could hear her breathing. It sounded like liquid being sucked through an old cloth, lungs that had been dead for decades, perhaps longer. Abby moved. The ghostly woman took her horrifying gaze from Anthony and peered towards the infant stirring in her crib. Anthony and Corinne watched in horror as the scorned witch reached her hand towards the baby. Instinct took over as Corinne reached for Abby, snagging her out of the crib just mere moments before the wretched black bones of the woman's hands got to her first. She ran into the hall as Anthony followed, slamming the door behind them. They heard an ear-piercing howl from behind the door. Its high-pitched squeal sent shivers down Corinne's spine. Brian was coming too, as Anthony scooped him up and ran back downstairs. He grabbed the car keys as they all rushed to the car. He started it as Corinne fumbled with the car seat and harnesses. "Drive!" she shouted. He began backing out of the garage down the driveway. "Cooper!" Brian shouted. "Where's Cooper?" Anthony slammed on the brakes. He glanced up into the window upstairs. He saw the woman standing in it, her face contorted into a look of rage and despair. Anthony began to open the car door. "What are you doing?" Corinne roared, grabbing his arm. "I have to get Cooper." "Anthony, wait!" But it was too late. He was now out of the car, heading back into the garage. Brian was crying. Abby didn't comprehend what was going on. Corinne tried desperately to see inside the dark garage, while at the same time staring back at the dark presence in the window. She saw a light flicker in the garage as Anthony opened the door that led to the kitchen. Then the light went dim as he closed it. She returned her gaze to the window. The shadow was gone. "Oh my God. Oh my God, Anthony, hurry. Oh my God. Mommy, what's happening?" Brian cried. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. Daddy's coming. He's coming." She saw movement again in the garage, but no light. It was still dark. The outdoor lights were off as well, making it more difficult to see. She squinted her eyes in the dark, trying to see anything at all, to see if Anthony had exited the house or garage. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the back window. Corinne screamed. "Cooper!" Brian cheered as he opened the door, letting the dog jump in. "Where's your father?" she whispered to herself. "Please, Aunt, where are you?" She looked to the window again. She saw movement. She didn't want to look, though. She didn't want to see that terrible face looking back at her. She closed her eyes, praying for Anthony to be safe and return to them as soon as possible. As she opened her eyes, she saw Anthony standing in the window. What are you doing? She shrieked. Get out of there, Aunt! She rolled down the window. Get out of there! She hollered to him. Anthony gazed down at the car in the driveway. The moon allowed just enough light to see that Cooper had snuck outside and was safely in the back seat with Brian. As he turned around to head back downstairs, the woman was standing in the doorway that led to the hall. She glared at him. The same snarling look and red eyes burned into his. What do you want? He yelled. Leave us alone! She remained hovering, only inches from the ground, her face filled with the color of ash. She's not yours, damn it! She's not yours! From the car, Corinne saw that Anthony had turned around. His back faced the window now. Why are you just standing there? She whispered to herself. Move! Get your ass down here now, she said. Just then she saw a movement in the other bedroom window. She saw another shadow, this time the figure of a man. His face was also covered in the same darkness she saw in the woman. He approached the window, pressing himself against it. His red eyes glowed too. The dark figure of the man smiled, a sinister, ominous smile that shook Corinne Nebolt to the bone. The presence gradually backed away from the window. She looked back to Anthony. He was still standing still. She could see him, but he was not looking back. She wanted to scream to him, let him know there was something else, when he quickly turned back around to look at her, and even from that distance she could see the whites in his eyes. She saw he was utterly terrified. He put his palm gently on the window. Corinne felt her guts turn loose in her stomach. She saw a dark shadow move behind him as the lights in the room went black. "Anthony!" she screamed. "Anthony!" Corinne didn't know what to do. She was in a state of shock and disbelief. The only reason she wasn't entirely catatonic was the distant echoes of Abby and Brian's cries in the back seat. All of a sudden she came to her senses. She hobbled over the center console and sat in the driver's seat. Anthony's seat. "Mommy, where are you going? Where's Daddy? We need to wait for Daddy." Corinne didn't know what to do. On one hand was her beloved husband that she couldn't just leave, primarily without knowing where or how he was. But on the other were her children, and she knew they weren't safe if they stayed. But she couldn't get Anthony off her mind. She noticed movement from the garage. It was nothing at first, but the more she focused her eyes on the dark garage, she saw something approaching the car very slowly. She hesitated to turn the lights on. Terror and panic made her thoughts irrational. After a few moments, she turned on the headlights. In the garage stood the two dark figures, and gently, rolling towards her, was a baby carriage. It crept to the car, its wheel creaking as it did. The two hideous ghosts hung motionless, sneering at her and the children. The carriage bumped the front of the car. It was covered in the same rust and stains as the one she removed several weeks prior. She looked back to the garage. The shadows both appeared to smile. Their teeth rotted and pitted. The woman lifted her arm. Each inch it rose, Corinne felt the thumping in her chest like a drum. Finally, the woman's bony hand stopped as she pointed to the car, straight at Abby. Corinne looked back at the carriage with the frightening realization that they wanted her to place Abby inside. Again, she looked back at the ghostly figures hovering in her garage. They looked like shadows with fine detail, horrifying, dark, like cold ocean water in a moonless sky. Their eyes continued to glow that deep red color, as their smiles now wavered back to sinister scowls. The woman continued pointing her finger. Brian now saw them. "Mommy, that's the woman I saw in Abby's room. Can you hear her now?" Corinne looked at the boy in the rearview mirror. Brian noticed the tears and terror on her face. "I'm afraid, Mommy. Where's Daddy? They want to take Abby. I know they do. She's their Sunday child. Daddy said he wouldn't let them take her. Where's Daddy?" He began to sob. She turned her eyes back to the woman and the man. She could actually hear the song now, the same song she hummed the other night. She began to remember something. A nursery rhyme her great-grandmother sang to her when she was a child. She turned around abruptly, enough to make Brian jump. "Wait, what did you say? What about the Sunday child?" Brian was still sobbing. "Please, baby, please, you have to tell me, what about the Sunday child?" The boy looked up at his mother. "The old lady says Abby is the Sunday child. They need the Sunday child. What's a Sunday child, Mommy? What do they mean?" "I think I know what we need to do." She turned back and faced the ghosts. Inside the house, Anthony woke up to pitch-black darkness. As his eyes adjusted, he saw a sliver of light shining into whatever room he was in. His thoughts still foggy. Somewhere in the deep recesses of his mind were the sounds of screams, hollow and lost, like they were spinning in all different directions inside his skull. He attempted to stand, but his strength was gone. Anthony tried to move his left leg, then his right. He squeezed his hands into fists, releasing them to get the blood flowing. Finally, he was able to sit up. He began to crawl to the small bit of light he saw, like a white ribbon of masking tape on the floor. He slipped his fingers into the crack that allowed the small amount of light to spill through. It was cold to his touch, as though his hands were gripping something metallic. He stretched his fingers as much as he could to feel the opposite side of the object blocking his escape. It was exceptionally smooth, cold, a familiar sensation, something he had put his fingers on many times throughout his lifetime. It was the cold characteristic of glass, the glass casing of a mirror. He soon realized he was trapped in the mysterious room that Corinne had discovered. He attempted to now kick at the mirror, but it was futile. He was not able to make it budge. It was as if it was bolted to the floor. He soon began to consider that he was trapped. Anger began to pulse through his body. A rage like fire that had been given fuel rose as he began to scream and curse at the mirror, preventing his escape. In the driveway, Corinne listened to the raspy, hoarse humming that carried its way to her ears as the two ghostly apparitions continued to stare at them and at the baby. All of a sudden, the dark man broke his gaze, turning his head to the left, to the direction of inside the house. It was then that Corinne heard her husband screaming. "He's alive," she thought. Two agonizing and terrifying high-pitched howls came from the ghastly figures. Corinne exited the car. Cooper began barking. The old woman looked back at Corinne as the man levitated towards the kitchen door. Corinne began pushing the carriage back up the driveway. She began whispering the rhyme her great-grandmother sang all those years ago. "Monday's child is fair of face." The ghost woman began to scream. "Tuesday's child is full of grace." The ghostly body began to tremor. Smoke began to seep from her dress. Corinne began to sing with more volume. "Wednesday's child is full of woe." The smoke became thicker. Black plumes spilled from her arms. "Thursday's child has far to go." Louder now, Corinne shouted. The old woman began to move backward, trying to hide from Corinne. "Friday's child is loving and giving. Saturday's child works hard for a living." In the attic, Anthony continued to scream, yell, punch, and kick the mirror. After he thought he had expended all of the sudden strength he gained from his rage, he felt the mirror give slightly. He kicked it again. The sliver of light grew wider. He began kicking it even more, then stood up and ran into the mirror with his shoulder. Light from the moon began pouring in. Just a few more thrusts of his body, and it would be enough to fit his way through. Suddenly, the light was dark again. The growing glow behind him disappeared. Anthony peered through the opening and saw the dark man blocking it, his red eye only inches away, looking through the crack, like it was a peephole. Anthony gasped, stumbling backwards. He began to hear the mirror being moved back, closing him back inside. "Fuck you!" Anthony shouted, running with all his might into the back of the mirror. Below, in the garage, the dark figure appeared feeble and withered. She held her hand up, trying to block the carriage from moving closer as Corinne pushed it right at the woman, now at the top of her lungs. "And the child that is born on the Sabbath day, that child is mine, forever and always!" Corinne cried, collapsing to her knees on the floor of the garage. The old woman's red eyes began to fade, rolling back into the black as she fell into a cloud of ash. Brian watched from the car as the woman disappeared. Her ashes began to swirl above the carriage. The carriage began to fold in on itself, also disappearing into ash. A huge rolling ball of black swirling smoke began to spin inside the garage. Corinne looked up at it from her knees. All at once, the fog sucked into the house like someone turned on an enormous vacuum. She sprang to her feet, running into the house to find Anthony. She heard wailing coming from upstairs. She double-hopped the stairs, bursting into the attic. Anthony was hanging halfway out of the mysterious room, clutching the side of the mirror desperately, trying not to be pulled inside by the two dark entities that had been summoned back to the eternal black of their damnation. Corinne gasped, running to him, grabbing his hands. "Let him go!" she screamed. In a deep, throaty croak, they heard the woman scream, "No! Release my husband, you miserable cunt!" With this, Corinne tugged Anthony's arm with as much strength as she could. Anthony slid out, the dark hands of the man and woman reaching out, trying to grab him. Anthony and Corinne looked at each other. They both scrambled to their feet and began pushing the mirror, sealing the two demons inside forever. The two evil entities let out one final high-pitched scream as they drowned in the darkness, sucked back to the hell that had released them, welcoming them back to the fires where they once burned together. Corinne and Anthony ran downstairs to the car. They jumped inside, locking the doors. "Mommy! Daddy!" Brian cried. "You're back!" "We're back, bud," Anthony exhaled. He looked over to Corinne. "That's it, we're going back." "Wait, back inside?" Brian asked. "No, bud. Back. Back by Nana and Pop and everyone else. Back home, where we belong." As the knee bolts exited the driveway, every mirror inside the house began to fade, losing their reflective surfaces. A week later, when the police went to investigate what happened, they couldn't understand why all of the mirrors in the house appeared to be covered with ash. Even after spending several minutes wiping down the surface, the ashy residue remained, as though it was beneath the reflective glass. "Excuse me, Detective?" Detective Ronald Trowbridge spun around to the female officer that just called him. "Yes?" "They want you upstairs in the attic." Detective Trowbridge headed up to the attic. When he entered, he saw 3 officers standing in front of a large mirror, tucked up close to a wall. Surprisingly, it was the only mirror in the house to still have a reflection. "What do you think, Detective?" asked one of the officers. Don't know." Trowbridge looked around the attic. He scratched the top of his head. "How you figure they got this big son of a bitch up here?" He nodded towards the mirror. "No clue," said another officer. "What should we do?" Trowbridge huffed as he walked over to it, examining it. He placed his fingers behind the mirror and space on the wall. He whirled back around. "I think there's something back here. I can feel a draft." "Should we move it and check?" Trowbridge considered this. "Yeah, I think we should. Couldn't hurt to see what's back there, right?"
The first words she said to him were, "Is it true you killed your parents?" He didn't answer, and whether or not you believed Sam Benedict did, in fact, murder his parents by burning them alive, had been the rumor of the entire school for years. What was for sure, Sam was, and has always been, a strange kid. The girl, Kim McConnell, was the kind of girl you figured would end up running off with some dude in a rock band. Eventually, she'd get knocked up and end life as an angry, single woman who smoked 2 packs a day on the porch of her double-wide. At this age, She was attractive, but time would catch up to her in her 30s and make Kim McConnell look 10 or 20 years older than she truly was. She blew a few strands of her fair-colored hair that had fallen across her face from the small breeze which snuck its way into the conversation. "You're not going to answer me?" Sam paused, contemplating if he should walk away or answer her. He had witnessed her staring at him during lunch in the cafeteria on many occasions, though she never approached him. Not until that day. At first he pretended not to pay attention to her, but after catching her several times he began to stare back. He expected her to turn away embarrassed, but she didn't. She continued to stare, analyzing him, and soon Sam began to feel something. Something about this attention made him begin to have a slight attraction to the thin blonde. Sam took his seat that day, alone at the table in the corner where he always sat by himself. He sensed a twinge in his gut when he didn't see her across the room like he had for the last month or so, and it appeared that no one else acknowledged that she wasn't there either, as though she was a cobweb in the corner, simply removed by a sweep of a broom. This angered him, causing his blood to heat like acid inside his veins. Everyone he went to school with could care less about the people who didn't matter. The kids who didn't make it up the rungs of the social pecking ladder. Sam was about to stand up and leave the caf, just before he saw a movement enter the door to his left. He turned and saw her. She was standing in the doorway, staring at him. After a few seconds, she motioned for him to walk with her. He paused, doubting he had indeed seen her ask for him. But she motioned again, and Sam pointed to his chest. "Me?" he mouthed silently. She smiled and nodded. He grabbed his backpack, walked over to the door, which was slowly shutting as Kim walked down the stairs that headed away from the door. The door led to an outside area that covered an expansive walkway, connecting the gym to the rest of the school. Typically, a few other kids were there with a hacky sack, but not today. Cool spring rain fell earlier. The hacky sack crew didn't go out there when it rained. Sam walked up to her. He was much taller than she. He looked down as she stared into his silver blue eyes. They reminded her of the way the ice from the pond behind her house looked when the thaw began earlier that spring. "Is it true you killed your parents?" Sam didn't answer. "You're not going to answer me?" "Do you think I did?" "I don't know," she smiled. "That's why I'm asking." Sam didn't respond. He waited for her to continue to ask or simply forget about it, but he realized that wouldn't happen. "I was only 4 when the fire happened. A lot of people believe different, but I hardly remember what the house even looked like that I lived in then." Kim frowned slightly. Her eyes, however, wanted him to continue. "I don't understand." "Why would you? Everyone in this school thinks I'm the dude who threw paint thinner on my mom and dad and lit them up to burn alive. Honestly, I was kind of pissed off at first, but then I began to realize it made people afraid to talk to me. And I like that. I enjoy being alone. So I never denied the rumors. It's like a silver lining to my bullshit life." "So, you didn't do it?" "No, of course I didn't. Do you think anyone would let someone like that go to school like a normal person?" "It was a house fire. An accident. They say it happens all the time. A candle caught my mom's art studio on fire. And once the flames hit the curtains, the room combusted instantly, followed by the entire top floor. That's where they were.
asleep. My mom forgot she had candles burning, and my neighbor rescued me, but my mom and dad, they never had a chance. Wow. I'm sorry, that sucks. Sam chuckled. What? She asked. Well, not exactly the way I expected this to happen. She smiled, looking into his eyes again. Expected? What were you expecting? I don't know, but I didn't think you were going to ask me so soon if I murdered my parents. I thought you... Never mind. Sam's cheeks had begun turning red. I only asked because I needed to know. And why would you need to know? So that I could ask you what I truly want to know. And what is that? I wanted to see if you would kill my stepfather. But since you didn't actually kill your own parents, and you're not as crazy as people say you are, it's kind of pointless now. Whoa, wait. Did you just ask me to kill your stepfather? Like, just like that? Like, hey, can you do me a favor and kill someone for me? Kim pursed her lips. Yeah, that's what I asked. I figured if you murdered your own parents, then maybe you'd think about doing it again for someone else. I think you mean for you. She paused, then nodded her head. Yeah, for me. She paused for a response. She received nothing. Of course, I'm only kidding. Honestly, I never liked the guy. My mom is just too ignorant to realize he's a piece of shit. But I thought it would be nice to know that he could be, she made air quotes with her fingers, taken care of if I wanted him to go, she smirked. Sam's only response was a small, inquisitive smirk as he looked down at her. His eyes bored into hers. A warm sensation developed in her belly. She sensed something about this boy, this perfectly sane but intense boy towering in front of her. It was something about the way he looked at her, like he understood everything about her, every secret she ever had. The shrill sound of the bell rang throughout the high school campus. Loads of other kids poured through the doors, passing by them both without a second glance. Sam put his hand under her chin and moved close to her. For a moment, Kim thought he was going to lean in and kiss her. Instead, he moved towards her left ear and whispered, "You asked me if I killed my parents, but you never asked me if I had murdered someone else." Kim's legs began to feel weak under her. The air in her lungs disappeared in an instant as Sam moved back in front of her, staring into her eyes once again. She froze, not knowing what to say next. And before she realized it, Sam was walking away from her to his next class. She watched him as he walked away. He turned back just once to look at her. He smiled slyly and winked at her. Again, she sensed the warm reaction in her belly, but this time was different. It felt slimy, like a worm slithering inside her guts, not the butterflies she had earlier. Did I literally just say that, she thought? And what did he mean by, "You never asked me if I had ever murdered someone else"? The rest of the afternoon, she decided to cut classes and hop from one bathroom to the next, avoiding getting seen by anyone inside the school. She couldn't put her finger on what bothered her so much. Was it what she asked Sam? Or was it what Sam said? The anxiety was eating her up inside, and all she could think about was finishing up the rest of the afternoon and getting back home. After school, Kim went to work at her part-time job at a small Italian restaurant in the next town over, Sal's Italian Bistro.
It was more like a hole in the wall to grab a decent slice of pizza than a restaurant. The owner, Sal, was her friend's father. She worked there from 3 p.m. to about 5:30, 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. She clocked out earlier depending on the number of people that came in on any given day. Sal Albricazzi noticed she appeared a bit distant and lost in her own thoughts that day. He hesitated but eventually asked Kim if everything was all right. Kim told him it was, but asked if he wouldn't mind if she made a phone call. Sal glanced around the small, empty restaurant and gave her a thin smile. Well, being that we're packed to the gills with absolutely nobody in the joint, go ahead, Kimmy. Take your time. We can handle it for a few. Kim walked into the back to make her phone call. Sal observed her as she did. It was unusual for her to seem so solemn. She was usually pretty cheerful, and being that Sal had known her since she was about 8 years old, he saw right away something wasn't right and gave her as much time as she needed to call whoever it was that she had to speak with. A few moments later, she walked back up front. She sat at one of the booths instead of behind the counter. She rested her cheek in her hand and began doodling on a napkin with her finger. You okay, kiddo? Kim continued to doodle her imaginary drawings on the napkin. My mom isn't answering her phone. I even called the house line and nobody answered. Oh, that doesn't mean anything, does it? Your mom could be out somewhere. I mean, it's only 3:30 or so. Maybe she had to run to the store or something. Her middle finger traced a circle on the napkin over and over. Yeah, I guess so. But normally she's home by now. Jeff doesn't like it when she isn't home when school gets out. Jeff was her stepfather. Sal knew him. Sal didn't like the man. He never told this to Kim, of course, but he didn't trust him and knew he was the polar opposite of who he pretended to be. Sugar on the outside, but piss and vinegar on the inside. How about this? Fold me up a couple dozen pizza boxes for later. Have one of the guys put them on the shelf for you, and once you're done, you can get out of here and go home. You sound good? As much as Kim hated folding up the pizza boxes, she was appreciative. Thanks, Mr. Abercrombie. I appreciate that. You sure you don't mind? Don't you think about it twice. Here you go. He handed her a stack of flat pizza boxes that were still wrapped in their cellophane. Once she got a few boxes in, she was in her rhythm, and soon began to forget about how anxious she was only a little while ago. A half a dozen boxes in, the phone rang. She stopped folding the box and began walking to the counter, when Sal put his hand up, signaling her to continue with the boxes. Sal's, he answered proudly. Any time he answered the phone himself, Kim could see how excited he became. He was proud of the little place he'd built. He had a lot of regulars that either came in directly to the restaurant or called in for their pickup order. Kim? Yeah, she's here. Hold on a moment, will you? He put the phone across his chest and yelled over to Kim. Phone call for you, kiddo. I'll take it in the back if that's okay, Mr. Abercrombie. He nodded to her. She ran to the back room again, hastily picking up the phone. Mom? It's me, the voice replied. Sam? Yeah. Who'd you think it would be? Kim swallowed hard. She began to wonder how he even knew she worked here. Hey, Sam, what's up? I'm kinda in the middle of work here. I know. That's why I called. I wanted to tell you something. Curious, she responded. Okay. You asked me something today. Do you remember what it was? Again, Kim swallowed hard, but this time her throat was too dry to get anything down. Sam, I'm not sure why I asked you about your parents, and I'm sorry. I don't know. I would just watch you every day at lunch, and you would just sit there all alone. Nobody came by to talk with you. Everyone's sort of what? Sam prodded. Well, everyone is kind of afraid of you, you know? I mean, The rumors and all. I know what you mean, Kim, but rumors or not, I've noticed everyone walk to the other side of the hallway when I'm walking down it. I'm not scary, Kim, but you could say... He paused, searching for the correct words. You could say I'm passionate. Passionate? Kim, you asked me something else today. Or should I say you requested something of me? Kim's stomach dropped. Her heart felt as though it was going to thrum right outside her chest. She felt the spines of dryness in the back of her throat, a feeling of sharp warmth begin to pulse at the bottom of her skull. Sam. It was at that moment that she could hear the distant sound of sirens blaring in the background. The fire whistle had been signaling it outside, but she had only begun to hear it as she listened to the sound of Sam laughing quietly on the other side of the line. She put the phone in front of her face and began screaming, Sam! What did you do, Sam? Sal dropped the pizza he was working on and ran to the back room. Kim's eyes were wide and bloodshot. Hot tears of sorrow and anger began to stream down them. Behind the tears, her face turned horribly pale as she continued to scream, Sam! Sam! Silence and white noise static echoed back. It was all she could hear on the other side of the receiver as the sirens wailed in the distance. Kim collapsed but clung to the phone on her ear. My God, Sam, please. Please, tell me you didn't. It was all she could say. Sal stood in the doorway, confusion lining his face. Panic began to creep inside his thoughts as he listened. Kim stared blankly into the room, her eyes focused on nothing but everything all at once. Please, God. Please. Don't let them all be dead, please. Don't worry, Kim. It won't come back to me or to you. Nobody will ever know. I don't feel so empty now, Kim. I don't feel empty. And now your world has been burned to the ground, too. Just like mine. It'll be all okay. It'll all be okay. It's like they told me all those years ago. Accidents happen. Accidents happen all the time. I work at a mental hospital, and some of the residents there are a little odd, to put it nicely. Sure, some people are afflicted with the so-called usual conditions like paranoid schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. Others are less clear-cut, like the one guy we have there that seems to fit into about 7 different personality disorders, and yet doesn't fit anyone just exactly. He definitely requires unconventional treatment. Nothing harmful, just to be extra careful around the guy. There is, however, one really weird type there. A delusional man who has been in the hospital for years now. I've been working at the hospital for a few years, and this man has been admitted for as long as I've been there. This guy, I'll call him Arthur McJohn, because why not? And I don't want his identity going out there. He has some sort of unique delusion. It's sort of like Cotard delusion or walking corpse syndrome. It's similar in the way that he believes he died once in the past. However, it's different in that he thinks he's been resurrected, or actually, that he escaped from hell itself. I've learned about the specific details only recently. I knew for the longest time that he has some suicidal tendencies as a result of his delusion. He believes to be having an extraordinary generative ability. In simple terms, he tries to convince everyone that he will come back from the dead once he manages to kill himself. Recently, he started improving, so we let him roam free around his living section of the facility. He still doesn't get to possess or handle anything that might cause him any sort of bodily harm. Anyway, what I'm about to tell you is what he told me one night. He came up to me from the dark hall, slowly, almost as if he was trying to creep up on me when I was busy doing the paperwork on other patients. I didn't even notice him. I was buried in the papers with the lights from my monitor almost soothing me, immersing me completely into my monotone work process at that moment. "Hey, Jack." Arthur's creaking voice crept up on me from in front of the counter, startling me. "Oh, God!" I yelped as I jumped from my seat. "I didn't mean to startle you. I'm sorry," the man in the pajamas said. It's fine," I said as I clenched my chest. "Do you need anything?" "Well, I'd like to talk to someone. Could you, he asked in response. I guess, but let's head to your room first, okay?" I answered, trying to relax in the process. "Sure," he said and turned back towards the dark hallway. I followed suit. The whole walk to his room was quiet, almost eerily quiet. For a person who wanted to talk, he didn't have much to say, it seemed. Once we made it to his room, he slumped his long and lanky form on the bed and motioned for me to sit on the chair by the door. I did. "So what did you want to talk to me about?" I asked hesitantly. His facial expression became serious, something very unusual for him. He was never seen having a serious expression on his face. "Do you know why I'm here?" he asked me, with a cold tone. "You suffer from a condition called Cotard delusion, and your family admitted you here after repeated suicide attempts," I responded, fact-of-the-matterly. "Yeah. My family admitted me here 30 fucking years ago. Do I look 60-something to you?" he remarked sarcastically. "You what?" I questioned. I'm pretty sure my whole body language gave out the fact that I wasn't expecting this sort of response. "Yeah. They never told you when they got me here," he remarked with a smirk forming on his face. He cut me off. "Impossible?" "Sure. You can always read my files and see when I was admitted. Do you know why the older staff members called Old Joe Atkins Barbarossa? Because he used to have a red beard." He kept on going. "Listen, what I've told them, what I've told everyone here is the truth. I've been to hell and back." "There's no way. If you got me here to convince me of something supernatural, I'm going to have to leave and lock your door again, Arthur," I said as I stood up from my chair and started picking my pockets for the master key to the patient's rooms. Admittedly, his remark about Dr. Atkins intrigued me. I never knew he had a red beard, or anything of that sort. The nickname fits as well. I had to keep my professionalism, however. I was about to leave when Arthur got up from his bed and pulled his shirt up. He pointed at his chest and back, spinning in place. "See these? Exactly the same location. That's the bullet that ended my life." I stopped myself from leaving. "So you've had an NDE and the lack of oxygen damaged your frontal lobe, causing the I was going to say, but he cut me off. "I woke up in the morgue in a body bag. I doubt people who were near death get placed in body bags, Jack," he said. "Okay, well, then tell me how it was like in hell." I decided to humor the situation, as I alert other staff members to arrive, just in case. "Now you're asking the good questions, Jack," Arthur exclaimed before slumping back down to his bed. He then continued speaking. You see, once you die, you go to this dark, pitch black, dark, wet, silent place, and there, you're alone, inside nothing, nothing at all, just you and the pitch black, silent darkness. There's a feeling of wetness, but it's so dull and muffled that you're not really in any wetness. You're not feeling anything in that place. It doesn't sound too bad, I mused, trying to ease up the ever-growing tension in the room. It's lovely for a short time, but then your mind, or soul, or something, that thing inside you begins trying to come up with things to keep you away from the nothing. And that's when something akin to hallucinations starts happening. You hear voices, and you see faces. And that's not too bad, but then, my friend, you begin feeling as if you're being followed, chased, preyed upon. The paranoia creeps in on you slowly, and everything becomes darker, more sinister. You begin seeing disturbed visages, and the voices become screams, shrieks of unimaginable suffering. A chill ran down my spine as he said that, and sometime later, the paranoia becomes unbearable, and you begin screaming into the nothingness, but no voice comes out. You try to move around, but you can't feel your body. Your fear only gets worse. You're losing it. The nothingness just eats away at you, slowly, patiently, almost deliberately. God knows how long later, you begin feeling pain. At first, it's just small pricks and pokes on your skin. A nice change from the constant nothing, a feeling at last. Unpleasant one, but still. It sounds awful, I cut him off. Oh, we're not even at the best part yet, son. The pain eventually grows. It grows endlessly, to the point where you feel as if you are constantly shot, stabbed, cut, beat, burned, all at once. You try to run away from the sensations, but you can't. That is when you realize you are frozen in place. That's when I finally realized I'm stuck in place. No, that's when I accepted it. I felt myself beginning to experience fearful discomfort. His tall tale was getting to me. Arthur simply continued. Fear. It becomes the only constant. Eventually, you get used to it. You get used to being always exhausted and in pain, and it becomes fine. Trust me, it does. It sure as fuck exhausts you, but then at some point you finally break. They finally manage to break your spirit. Arthur grasped at his pillow tightly and kept on saying, For me, it was when I saw that thing. I don't even know. It had a jaw massive like a cave and one red, bloodshot eye on top. I can't. Hey, are you all right? I asked as I started making my way towards him. I'm fine. I just struggled to remember. You see, when this thing came close enough, I think I began feeling like I was being torn apart, skin from the body, flesh from the bones, organs being pulled out. I even felt like the bones were being crushed, and all of this is just the darkness around you that's doing this to you. Oh, and the worst part is when you begin feeling yourself, your core, your soul, your whatever makes you. You're being torn apart to bits and pieces, memories, knowledge, feelings. All is slowly stripped away until there is nothing left. They take your memories, your feelings, the fucking pain, everything. Arthur said as his voice quivered and tears began streaming down his eyes. Well, now you're safe and you'll be all right, okay, Arthur? I said as my colleagues began showing up at the entrance of his room. I don't know, man. I barely escaped by the skin of my teeth. I clutched at this little memory when I set my brother accidentally on fire.
I held to this memory so tightly, and I didn't even want to. He burst into tears immediately as other staff members began tending to him. "It'll be all right, I promise," I told him as I stood at the edge of the room, watching as they tried talking him down. "I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. They'll kill me. They'll kill me. I don't want to go back," he screamed repeatedly as he began thrashing and clawing at the staff members who tried to calm him down. "You won't go anywhere, Arthur," I told him before leaving the room to notify the administration. Apparently, they had to strap him down, and he didn't sleep ever since. Nothing puts him down. He's been awake and raving for the last week and doesn't seem to slow down. His vitals are going down, no matter what we do. His health is declining, and he won't fall asleep. I'm afraid exhaustion will claim his life. I do wonder why he keeps screaming about someone's cold hands touching him. Hello and welcome to this new recording. Just want to let you know that right off the bat, this is something a little bit different than what I normally do. This was an idea that I had the other night that I wanted to try, and I want to know what you think about it. So if you can do me a favor and let me know in the comments what you think of this story that I wrote. It is a little bit different. It is more like yourself walking into a nightmare. I hope you enjoy. You walk into the house. It is the first time in years. Immediately, the familiar smells of the house hit you. You smell the furniture and leather. The subtle hint of charred firewood still hangs in the air, never having fully escaped with the rest of the smoke and ashes from prior blazes in the old fireplace. It is spring, though, now. No fires have been lit for several weeks and won't be for many months. However, the scent, it still lingers. You walk through the living room into the kitchen. The painting still hangs on the wall above the cabinets. A boat with large sails floating through a rough sea. On the opposite side of the canvas, a blue sky with calm waters. Below, there is a quote hand-painted in thin, looping, white letters. Life is like the ocean. It can be calm or still, and rough or rigid, but in the end, it is always beautiful. Author unknown. The painting brings a small smile to your face. You remember the painting well. You remember seeing it all the times you were in the house previously. The scene was always like a warm welcome each time, and it is yet again, all these years later. You hear voices in the next room that carry their way to you. It is the sound of your family, and they too are reminiscing, mentioning all the times prior that they have been in the house as well. The house was your great-grandmother's. You and your family moved away, and you had not been there for many years. You missed it, but there are some other things that you didn't. Those are in the other rooms, the rooms upstairs, where you dare not go if you mustn't need to. All these years later, those rooms and what leads to them sends a shiver that slides down your spine, cold and uninvited. The dozens of porcelain dolls, with their emotionless smiles and their black, lifeless eyes. Thinking about them causes the hairs on your necks to prickle. You begin to remember when you were much younger, just a small child, how those eyes would watch you, follow you. As you walked up the stairs, you pushed your back against the railing, which was your feeble attempt
to keep your distance as far away from those lifeless obsidian eyes as you could. You recollect how your young mind would create enough bravery to take each step. Should you walk slowly and watch them, or race up the stairs as quickly as your little legs could go? Would you be able to escape their hands stretching out for you, trying to carry you to the other side, the side where the lost are never seen again, where the lost watch the living through those miniature, coal-colored eyes? You exit the kitchen. You pause in the hallway that leads to the dining room, as well as the staircase on the opposite side. You begin to hear whispers. Dozens of tiny murmurs, inaudible secrets, passed from each to the other. They recognize you are back. They sense your fear. Your delicious fear. It is like a scent. A pheromone fear is. It steams off you like vapor on the hot pavement from a passing rain shower in the high heat of summer. The more you are afraid, the deeper the fear, the more it expels from your bones, allowing only those that crave it to inhale its sweet aroma. This is what keeps them alive. But only in your thoughts, right? Of course, the dolls aren't alive, you think. You're older now, wiser. But those childhood fears remain deep and rooted, as they always have. They still hold their stringy fingers planted in the deep recesses of your nightmares. A thought works its way inside you, a whisper that has been repressed for longer than you can remember. Don't touch the dolls. She will know if you do. And the more you think about it now, you realize that you've never seen anyone touch the dolls. They walk past them, unnoticed, the same way you would walk past ugly wallpaper in a hotel hallway. You know it's there, you see it, maybe even have brushed your hand against it as you walk to and from your room to the elevators. But you never really paid any attention to the details after the first time you saw it. You sense there is something to these dolls, these sentinels at the top of the stairs watching you as well as everyone else. Tonight, your family had planned to stay at the hotel nearby, a large Sheraton that resembled a castle when you drove past it earlier. At the last moment, it was decided that you would all stay in the house tonight. Why pay all that money when you have a perfectly good house to sleep in? Your grandfather said earlier to your mother. She would want it this way. Your mother smiles. She looks at you, then your father. But you notice her apprehension. You notice the thin, fake smile your mother does when she doesn't want to say yes, but does. Yes, she would, your mother says, as she stands and walks out of the room. You don't want to. You are terrified to stay inside this house. But at the same time, this would allow you to do what you always wanted to do in the first place. You've planned this for years, and tonight will finally allow it to happen. Several hours have passed now. Your belly is full from the large dinner you enjoyed earlier. The coffee and desserts have long been cleaned up as well. It is time for bed, time for you to find your way to the bedroom at the top of the stairs. You feel a surge course through your body. Is it fear? Adrenaline? A bit of both? You wonder while also appreciating it, using it to walk your way up each creaky step. You gaze up and see the dolls. They are suspended on their stems, propping them up, motionless. You again begin sensing their gazes, watching you. You look away,
gripping the railing with your right hand. The last step is always the most difficult. The last step before reaching the upstairs hallway that leads to the bedrooms. This is where the dark-haired doll with the crack through her face stays, still there after all this time. Her red flowered dress is, however, covered with a layer of dust, but it is there nonetheless. You've always been terrified of this one. After all, it was you that caused the crack in her porcelain face. A shiver crawls up the base of your spine. It feels cold. You lower your head, shrugging your shoulders, attempting to brush away the tremor in your body. You are brought back to the memory of being 3 or 4 years old. You were in the bedroom, the same bedroom you will be sleeping in tonight. You were on the floor, sitting on the white oval throw rug that covered the dark, stained hardwood floor of the bedroom. You had a toy or figure in your hand, something you were playing with as your parents and other guests were downstairs, talking, eating, doing the things adults do that young children don't fully understand yet. That was the first time you saw her. She, the dark-haired doll, was placed on the table beside the bedroom door, propped up on her holder as well. Her head hung loosely to her side, and even then, even so young, your young mind believed she looked dead. You remember how the temperature of the bedroom dropped at that moment, so cold you could see your breath in the room. Your little body wanting to run from the room, but you couldn't stop staring at the doll's black eyes. How they looked so shiny, but at the same time dead. They burned their way into the floor below her crooked doll neck. After many moments, it seemed, but perhaps only seconds, you finally built up the courage to run downstairs to the living room to return to your family. And as you stood, the doll's head moved. It looked at you. As sure as you were then, you are now. You saw the head straighten and begin looking at you. And you wanted to scream, you wanted to run, but her horrifying gaze caused your body to freeze. You saw miniature, pinhole-sized white dots emerge in those black eyes, how the blackness of them almost reflected something inside them, as though they were opening. Then a grin began to form on its porcelain face. You dropped whatever toy was in your hands. It hit the rug, and as though this was a cue, the door to the bedroom slammed shut. You were stuck in this room with her, locked in for how long? You began screaming and kicking, but no one heard you. No one came to find you, to rescue you. You screamed until you could taste blood in your throat. And finally, you took the toy you had dropped. You picked it up off the floor next to you, flinging it as hard as your little body could allow. It hit the table, making it wobble. The dark-haired doll fell to the floor with a loud thud and strange crash. The thud was too loud for a doll, however. It was like the thud of something that was alive but was no more. Blood began to flow from the crack of the porcelain face. You watched it as it pooled around her, mirroring the closed door and its reflection. Then, finally, the knob on the door turned. In ran your mother. "What just broke?" she yelled, your tears streaming down your small face. Your mother looks below her and sees the broken doll on the floor by her feet. There was no blood, however, and there was no weight to the doll as your mother picked it up, shaking her head nervously. "I should have told you to stay out of here, to stay downstairs," your mother scolds you. These dolls are very special. They're very fragile, and you broke it. She will not be happy. And you wanted to say it was an accident. You wanted to say how the doll scared you, how she slammed the door on you. You wanted to tell your mother how the doll looked at you, how it was alive, but your voice was hoarse. It hurt to talk. Later, you watched as your grandfather glued the head back together. You remember how meticulous he was, like he was performing surgery on it. Your great-grandmother watched from the side of the room, leaning against the wall, watching him, watching her son glue the doll back together, her hands clenched together tightly, as though she was in prayer. From that moment on, the doll never went back into the bedroom. It was then placed on the table at the top of the stairs, the table you are staring at this moment. The old memory begins to fade, bringing you back to now, bringing you back to this moment. Tonight, you decide, you will destroy her. Perhaps this will be the process that will finally dispose of this darkness, this irrational fear that you still carry with you. Maybe this will permanently stop the nightmares, where anyone and everyone in your dreams looks at you with the same black eyes as these dolls. You listen as the sounds of the old house still settle. Even now it groans, a century after the house was first built. The moonlight shines in the bedroom window as you slowly rock back and forth on the old wooden rocking chair in the corner of the bedroom. The voices in the house are hushed. Everyone has turned in and should all now be asleep. You slowly open your bedroom door, grabbing the dark-haired doll with you as you float silently down the staircase out the back door. You take the dark-haired doll, tossing her on the ground. You crush her face under your boot heel. You then toss her doll body into the makeshift fire pit near the patio, filling it with flame. You douse the dress and fabric of the doll in lighter fuel and watch as it burns under the moonlight. Once she is just ash, smoldering at the bottom of the pit, you return to the house, placing the remaining dolls of the staircase inside the large box at the foot of your empty great-grandmother's bedroom. She used to call it her hope chest. She said, "You put things inside you want to keep safe." This is what you want. You want the dolls to be safe, safely hidden away, never to be seen again. You creep back to your bedroom, shut off the light, and sleep. You awaken a few hours later. Darkness still lingers. It is not yet morning. You notice the sounds of voices in the hallway outside the bedroom door. Loud whispers, but futile in the late night. You open the door to see your parents and your grandfather. They look at you. Concern lines their faces. "What have you done?" Your mother asks. Her eyes are pink, tears building in them. I told you, her voice rising. "She would know if you touched the dolls." Confused, you reply, "But she's gone. Great-grandma. She passed away years ago, Mom." "I never meant great-grandma. Great-grandma protected all of us from her, which is something we can no longer do. I meant her." And you watch as your mother points behind you into the bedroom. She puts her head down, as your father and grandfather do as well. They cannot look inside. They are frozen, as you were all those years ago. The hairs on the back of your neck feel like wire as they prickle against your skin. You swallow, not wanting to turn around. You hear a sound, a breath. Something is behind you. You turn slowly, closing your eyes as you do. Finally, you open them. The face staring back at you is porcelain. A crack runs down the face through the right eye. Her dark hair flows in the air as though she is underwater. You look into her eyes. They are blacker than a starless sky. She frowns at you, then gently touches your face with her hand. All the sound fades from your ears, and you fall backwards, but you do not land on the floor as you expect. You land on something soft. You look next to you and see dozens of faces looking at you, their eyes black as coal. You look up as a hot tear falls from your mother's face to you, but it doesn't touch your skin. Instead, it bounces off your face, your cold porcelain face. Your mother closes the hope chest. The dark-haired doll stands behind her, nodding her head back and forth, dismayed, angry, her neck crooked. Your mother's cries are the last things you hear before everything goes dark and your eyes fill with darkness. Bang, bang, bang. 3 knocks on the cabin door. Loud knocks. Desperate knocks. Victor squinted through the dark of the cabin. It was early morning, the sun barely cresting over the mountaintops, casting great orange waves across the sky. The door squeaked on its hinges as it opened. Cold air rushed into the cabin, and Victor shivered as a sudden chill gripped his body. Snow was ravaging the ground, coming down in thick clumps. A pale, gaunt man with high cheekbones stared anxiously from a few feet away, clutching at the body of a larger man unconscious on the ground. Fear was stained in his eyes, palpable fear. "I'm Joseph. My friend, Mark, he's injured." The man's tone wavered as he spoke, like a crying child. "Please, he won't last much longer. We need help." Victor raised his hand to his chin. There was a bloody trail stained into the snow, leading up to the cabin, winding its way across the mountain like a snake. The wind was menacing in its intensity, ramming against the cabin as if it were trying to blow it off the mountain. "You come from the village?" Victor responded, his head tilted upwards in uncertainty. We're tourists. Our camp is a while away, past the village and left. We've been traveling on foot, me and Mark. We were hiking and there was..." "Enough," Victor spoke, sticking his hand out suddenly. "Come inside. I'll help your friend." Slumping Mark's body over his shoulder, Victor stepped back inside the cabin. Joseph rushed inside, pausing near the raging fireplace and rubbing his hands together. He sighed deeply, glancing out of the window with a worried glare. A small group of children were gathered below the mountain overlook, near the cabin. Mark's lips were bluish pink, and his body was cold and heatless. Victor listened closely for a sign of a heartbeat, but heard nothing. "Neck injury. Looks quite serious. You're lucky you got to me now. A few more minutes out there and he'd be gone." Victor lied. Mark had been dead for minutes now. Joseph turned suddenly, raising an eyebrow. Victor was poring through a blocky manual type book of sorts, having laid Mark on a large table in the center of the room. "Is it true what they say?
What who says?
The villagers down by the river below. They told us about you, a healer up in the mountains. We thought it was superstition, just a local legend.
The villagers say a lot of things. Tales of ghosts and demons and pixies and such. Easy to imagine why. All that time spent in the middle of nowhere. Not much to do or say. No wonder there's so many stories.
They say you're a trickster, a con man. They said you couldn't be trusted, Joseph spoke.
A bunch of ungrateful bastards is what they are. Always wandering about, getting injured, dragging themselves to the cabin, pathetic little tears in their eyes, then walking out again without a word of thanks. If I refuse to help them, they threaten me with violence. They aren't too agreeable with tourists either, as I'm sure you've experienced.
That's how Mark was injured. They turned on us, acted friendly at first, then ambushed us as we were leaving and robbed us. One of the little shits wedged a pickaxe in Mark's neck.
Victor laughed coldly. Figures.
A fist-sized rock smashed through the window, scattering glass on the cabin floor. Joseph jumped out of the way while Victor scowled and rushed to the new opening. Quiet cheers echoed upwards across the overlook. A small group of village children were jumping with joy from down below, pebbles clutched in their hands, parents cheering them on.
You couldn't have picked a worse place to be touring, my friend. These villagers are blight on the land. Like little rats they are. For all the years I've spent here, I've never seen a more pitiful bunch of ingrates across all of Europe. They take, and they never give back. Pure scum.
Joseph leaned against the cabin wall tentatively, unsure of how to react. So is it true or not? Can you really help people like they say?
Victor set down the manual on a large bookshelf, cracking a sly grin. There was a sudden flash of light as he began chanting some strange dialect that Joseph could not understand. The words echoed through the room as if it were a cave.
What?
A final flash shot across the walls, and Joseph clamped his eyes shut. When he opened them again, he was stood outside the cabin, Mark and Victor by his side. "You're welcome," Victor spoke, as small wisps of snowfall landed on his face. "Mark's gonna be fine. He's just a little dazed right now. Side effect from the process. Give it a few minutes and he'll be perfectly fine."
Mark mumbled quietly in confusion, blinking and scratching at his head. "Thank you so much," Joseph spoke. Tears of happiness welled up in his eyes. "I would offer you money, but the villagers—"
"Don't worry about it, friend. Your kindness is payment enough. Oh, and Joseph." Victor leaned in closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "Your friend was dead. Try and take better care next time."
"My God, I had no idea. At least it's all sorted out now, I suppose," Joseph replied, shaken at Victor's words. "But if I can just ask you one last favor."
"And what would that be?"
"Don't let the villagers get away with what they did. I don't know what sort of crazy powers you have, but you must teach them a lesson, please."
Victor bit his lip, seemingly contemplating the offer. "I think I know something that would do the trick."
Joseph nodded, and with a hopeful smile, the pair set off down the snow-cast mountain. Descending the peaks was not an easy task, and Joseph struggled to find his footing as he and Mark slid downwards. Mark pushed further towards the bottom, while Joseph stopped, peeking at what had caught his eye below in the village. "Go on, Mark. I'll be there in a minute." Mark gave a shaky thumbs up and skidded to the bottom of the slope, continuing across the mountain while Joseph approached the village apprehensively. It was utter carnage. People were dashing madly along the streets, clutching their throats as they tripped over one another in a frantic daze. One by one, their panicked movements began to slow to a crawl, right up until they collapsed in the snow, a pool of blood forming around their bodies. Mortified, Joseph ran to the nearest villager, an elderly man shaking violently on the ground.
I can't breathe.
He spoke roughly, as if every syllable was causing him great pain. What's wrong? What do you need? Joseph asked the man, trying to hold his body steady.
Water. I need
The man's words were lost in a sea of coughs, and Joseph watched in horror as his milky eyes glazed over, his arms falling limply by his side. The skin on the man's neck was peeling away on its own, layer by layer. Within moments, the wound had formed completely, stretching from the man's chin to his collarbone. It was Mark's exact gash, as if it had been copied and pasted onto the man's neck. Yellowish pus leaked from the opening, staining the man's clothes. Joseph retched, barely managing to contain the rising vomit in his throat. Everywhere he looked, the gashes bloomed on people's necks like a virus, always the same size and shape as Mark's. Small children wheezed and choked by their parents' corpses, the life draining from their bodies. Screaming mothers held dead babies in their arms, blood trickling down to their breast. Even the animals were suffering. Dogs moaned and whimpered from the houses, and birds flew skywards in fear, only to plummet back down to the ground, half dead in the air. It was a circus of death, and Joseph was the audience. There was nothing he could do. The last remaining villager stumbled drearily through the ocean of dead. The wind whistled eerily along the alleys as he hacked up globs of blood and mucus, depressingly aware of his fate. With clenched fists, he let out a ragged yell, collapsing forward onto another body. Snowfall was already slowly burying the corpses, covering their pale faces. Joseph sank to his knees, unable to speak or even move. Weeping, he questioned if what he saw was even real. What confirmed it was Victor standing proudly on the mountain overlook, that smug smile still plastered across his face in the sunlight.